Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on the Think BRICS channel today. I want to welcome back two very skilled economists to go into the deeper depths on the China and BRICS trade dynamics. I want to first welcome Andrei Ginchenko and Jean Lian to us to discuss this in detail. Andre researches international trade issues as well as structural change dynamics at the Center of Macroeconomic Analysis and Short Term Forecasting in Russia. Andre's research in particular shows how BRICS supplies resources to China, but also could struggle as a buyer for its potentially high tech goods. And Jean Lian is a very skilled economist and expert on China's political economy, industrial development, and technological development, and graduated from Peking University in 2015 and is currently has books called The Truth About Capital, as well as other predictions in his portfolio per se. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining us today, and I want to go sort of right into straight into the powerful data. Right, we're talking Andre, BRICS at 40% of global GDP, but its low per capita income blocks a lot of these high tech sales like electronic vehicles. Um, Gian, do you agree that BRICS isn't deep or rich enough yet to sort of satisfy these markets like for electronic vehicles?
I think that I should say that the typical BRICS countries like Russia or Brazil, maybe Brazil could in a process of becoming a market of many of the advanced technology product, and Russia is also already as you know in the past 3 years, but it's still not big enough. I should say generally agree on Andrew's research result that it's still not rich and deep enough. As for India, I think that is another complicated story because India do absorb some of China's products, as you know, in the past 10 years on previous telephones. But I don't think India could become, I mean, very, very big market, future market for China. So that is a separate topic. So in general, I agree with that. It's not rich enough yet.
And how do you think how do you imagine China getting involved to sort of create these big projects and also trying to access these deeper markets that you think need time for development here?
Okay, so I would describe the future potential pathway to be a transitional period. It is because, how to say it, today the global industry map, if you check every major industry, in a sense of manufacturing, China is always the major manufacturing, ranging from sometimes for 60% of the global outputs or sometimes for 100% of output. So China is definitely the majority, predominant, dominantly producer of all kinds of industry goods. So that means that if the Western world, including America and Europe, particularly America, USA, because he is a deeply deindustrialized. Yeah, I can understand that many of MAGA people want to recover or rebuild up the industry capacity to guarantee they're concerned about the sovereign safety of the supplies. However, it will take a long time. My personal estimate that it definitely needs more than 10 years to rebuild that or even more. So it means correspondingly, with the former globalization map on the trade map, the markets of America and Europe still exist for around 10 years. So in the 10 years, we have transitional periods. And during what is most important is during these transitional periods, the China, as my suggestion, should actively build up China's, our own circulation without the Western world, our own circulation on goods and okay, resources with other non-Western countries. Okay, from the African countries, pretty typical global South, and some of the Asian countries like Southeast Asia, and also Russia, and also, for example, Brazil, and some of the friendly European countries like Hungary. So also, of course, including many of the other Latin American countries, if American did not make trouble for us, so that will be a general map. And to realize that, very important thing that we need to know that we cannot purely or just waited to wait for or rely on the so-called demand already existing demand in these countries. Because honestly speaking, particularly for those developing countries, after 2022, because the U.S. Dollars interest rate hike, it has lots of consequences, and many of the developing countries' currency was depreciated or unstable, so their purchasing power actually shrink during these 3 years. All of the concept of global south is got lots of significance in recent 3 years. But the purchasing power in many of the, for example, African countries, Asia countries, is not very good. So in this way, that's based on China's development experience. These countries are generally on the stage of China's stage situation, like from 1950s to 1990s. And based on China's economic miracles experience in the 1990s, in the 21st century, it should be investment driven, that is infrastructure investment driven growth. And who to launch that is China itself. So what I suggest that is basically you can compare with Marshall Plan, okay, but bigger than Marshall Plan, and it should be dominated by Chinese yuan because Chinese yuan, as you know now, is basically zero interest currency. So it is very, very easy, and for example, infrastructure can roll over for continue again and again, and artificially creating the purchasing power in these countries and absorb the productivity of China's industry output and install those infrastructure in Africa, in all these developing countries, and then these were penetrating into the society, generating a power, the new purchasing power, and buy back lot. Furthermore, Chinese industry goods. So infrastructure it consumes lots of Chinese industry goods, and the related purchasing power in these countries will continue to consume lots of China's output. And also, Chinese companies, for example, construction companies, can create jobs also for Chinese managers and also for local workers. So that is economic logic circulation I suggest. So this could be a major dynamic for this grand transition to form a China as a head, I mean as a leader, new circulation, global circulation. And for this process, for example, the big member in BRICS, for example, Russia and Brazil can definitely benefit from that. So that is my major logic. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Andre, do you does that align with your view sort of on China's role in proactive trade to this growing BRICS demand?
And generally, yeah, I agree that right now we're witnessing the important window of opportunities that may last for about 5 or 10 years, and during this period, we should do something to empower the new drivers of economic growth in BRICS countries. And China, of course, can make an important addition to this process. Lian's idea about artificial purchasing power that is generated by currency swaps generally seems promising to me, and it may be important for creating new south-south cycles. So maybe China's trade with fast-growing ASEAN countries doesn't need such additional tools, but trade with BRICS could really be facilitated by such instruments. However, in my mind, if we limit this mechanism to creating infrastructure with the help of Chinese goods, we risk to get the growing reliance on imports from China, and this is now a concern in some BRICS countries. In the medium term, it may work well, but outside this 10-year window, in my mind, we may face some risk of partial deindustrialization for other BRICS countries due to their lower competitiveness and maybe lower incentives to produce high value added goods. So, in my opinion, it may be beneficial not to limit this instrument to infrastructure, but maybe stimulate investment in manufacturing in other BRICS countries, especially in machinery, I think that for China it may be important also because there is some limit in my mind to continuously benefit from merchandise exports because after additional several years of fast growth of exports, this may happen that China will have to shift focus to selling technologies, such as some developing countries, as the US were forced to do so, selling licenses, patents, software, and so on. Of course, this should be implemented very carefully for China. But there are also some benefits in my mind. The first benefit is maybe a lower resource dependence of the economy because China's economy is very large and further merchandise growth may require additional resources and may, in some circumstances, create some shortages of resources and rise their prices. And second, selling licenses may stimulate a shift to more equal distribution of productive potential in BRICS countries. And so, in 10 or 15 years, when Chinese per capita income will be maybe very high, it would be important for Chinese consumers to differentiate their consumption to have access to a wider range of products with different characteristics and from different countries. And so maybe China would also need some demand for imports from BRICS countries as well. But of course, it's not the situation of the current day, yeah. But maybe in 10 or 15 years, this might turn. So, in my mind.
Yeah, and that's a very good point because even within these 10, 15 years, there's going to be, this dissemination, the impact on the Chinese consumer. It's not going to simply just be from the government in Beijing. There's going to be a lot of dissemination towards the regional governments and how that fits in with Beijing's dynamic versus um, if the regional governments are specifically sort of rigid in a specific paradigm. I'm referencing this book by Lan Xiaohuan that talks about this paradigm rigidity with these regional governments that could really affect, you know, uh, Beijing's targets if they want to hit that, particularly with investments and swaps. Jian, do you sort of agree that it may be a lot harder from the regional level if that's a goal that they want to achieve here?
Yes, I should say that Lan Xiaohuan's book of the Inside Affairs, okay, it's a very popular book even in China. I recently I heard that although many Westerners and non-Westerners, foreigners are also talking about. Even my wife, also analysts, she told me, okay, dear, do you know that Lan Xiaohuan's book? I said I heard of it, but I didn't either. But I checked it very briefly. I should say that it's not, not something I'm not familiar, very familiar. And his description in Chinese way is very orthodox. It's a mainstream. Although maybe it's not so mainstream in Western world, but Lan Xiaohuan actually he is a Western educated, a little pro-liberalism economist in China. He's a not typical Chinese character economist like me. So his explanation is totally not out of my explanation. I'm very familiar with. So in my summary, okay, regional government is the main economic dynamic driver in the Chinese economic system, and actually 20 years ago. By the way, Benjamin, I'm graduated in 2008 as master, not 2015. So I should say 20 years ago when I was in bachelor, my undergraduate period, 2001 2005. There was a very famous right wing libertarian Hong Kong economist, Stephen Chang. So he's telling basically the same thing as Lan Xiaohuan today is talking about. So what is the description is like the regional governments, provincial, city, maybe county level, they are running like platform companies. They are itself is like companies. So you can basically see the tax or other, including land revenue, selling revenue is their revenues as a corporate. And they of course they have privilege. That privilege is secret. Is that they were more easy to get the loans from the banks, including commercial bank, including the policy bank, the China Development Bank. By the way, China Development Bank has a lots of roles outside China. In the first 20 years of 21st century, it also have even bigger roles inside China. And their cooperative parties are these regional governments. So these regional governments, it's because of these regional governments that you can see those many of the mega projects in China. Of course, the railway, high-speed railway, is a cooperation between the China Central Ministry of Railway, former Railway Ministry, today a General Railway Corporation, with the local governments. And many of the mega projects like bridges, okay, you see the so-called big bridges in the southwestern part of China. It is achievements of regional governments of like Guizhou's provincial city. So why I to emphasize that is that regional government plays a very important role in monetary creation mechanism in Chinese society, in Chinese economic system. So he is actually one of very important cooperating parties to create money on commercial bank deposit account level, because loan creates money. If you borrow a loan of 1 billion Chinese yuan, you actually created a 1 billion Chinese yuan during these long periods, and will return. It will disappear. But if you can circulate it before that, roll over before that, it continues. So that is secret of Chinese economy. Okay, so that is in the inside Chinese internal economies, regional government's role. Basically, regional governments play the role inside Chinese economy. Of course, for the outside, circulation, for example, China's trade with other foreign countries. Regional governments has two related topics on foreign related issue. Firstly, is of course about the companies inside this region to export something, earning revenue. Of course, they are very active and encourage that if it could be achieved, no matter if it's export to US, Europe, I should say Japan. I mean, in 1990s, in 2000, 2010s, that is majority. Okay. And also now to Africa, to Russia, to Latin America, to Southeast Asia, they're all happy to. Because with this, it's their political achievement first. Secondly, it could be, related tax, value added tax and lots of other taxes. And a second way is, of course, more important in 1990s, early 2000s to early 2010s. That is attract so-called foreign direct FDI, okay, foreign direct investment. Still today, if you heard about our national leader, our deputy prime minister speak on Davos, he still mentioned this. Welcome, China is very welcome for the FDI, for foreign investment, so on and so on. So the executive level is mostly on regional government. So of course, but today is less and less, important actually, because people know that those Western countries, which is majority resources of those foreign investment, now is stopped flow in. Today we're talking about other, for example, ODI and other things. Okay, I mean China's investment overseas and so on. So that is a natural. So basically, um, China's regional government is not so related to what I mentioned before about the different opinions among the Chinese political forces on the Chinese yuanization, de-dollarization of foreign trade system, overseas economic relationship. They are not related to. They just be happy if any economic activity could be encouraged. They will be happy. No matter if that was for example suppressed by certain reason. For example, China-Russia trade surged since 2022, and as everybody knows, the sanctions issues on the so the Chinese big banks will say that because of the sanction risk, we will not doing the trade with Russia. So what to do solve that? And I can tell you, I can guarantee that every regional government is encouraging the company inside his ruling regions that if there's opportunities to act for Russia, they'll be happy. So that is those not a financial regulation agency in provincial level, they organize everything to overcome the obstacle. For example, there's a barter trade system now. As far as I know, package it as a financial service now inside Russia. So you can now send money from T Bank to China. That is because barter system. And this barter system was actually promoted and allowed by central government, but executed by each province. So every province will be happy if these barriers caused by the weaponization of dollar could be solved. Another example is China's African trade, for example. So as far as I know, Ethiopia, as I mentioned before, Ethiopia is very, very trapped by the shortage of US dollar. So before the Chinese Yuan channel was formally established and start to function between China, Ethiopia, and other, for example, other African countries, I can tell you on provincial level, there's many, many so-called innovative barter mechanisms. I have seen many written by those provincial platform companies, which actual governments, to boost or support the China's trade with Africa. So that is I think a good example of an attitude of regional government in China. Okay, that is my opinion.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to just quickly, Andre, this is for you. I want to quickly just sort of take this from domestically to back to sort of from an international perspective, like you were talking about with China's improving investment with Ethiopia, for example. Andre, with like uncertainty with BRICS or like in Russia, for example, can a low rated or can a low rate renminbi sort of debt uh, be sort of a thing to stabilize demand for Chinese goods in Russia? And what is your opinion sort of on India, not necessarily as China's market, but more of Russia's bridge for this?
Yes, thank you, Ben. It seems to me that Russia now has a good room for maneuver with international debt, since its debt to GDP ratio is quite low, less than 20%. That is very low for international standards. Yeah, and the situation with discounts on prices for Russian oil is also quite hard, and these discounts exceeded $20 per barrel in December. So there are some incentives to attract additional funds. But on the other hand, in Russia, the desire to borrow internationally has been long limited by positive trade balance. And if we can obtain the necessary amount of uh, some yuans, yeah, from exports to meet our current needs in Chinese imports. So the will to borrow may weaken. But of course, if we plan to grow faster, if we plan to implement new mega projects or build new factories, our need in imports may excess our current needs. Yeah, and in this situation, there would be definitely some room to increase international debt, and including such mechanisms that Leon suggested. But also, today, the balance between industrial policy and macroeconomic stability policy in Russia in the last year was shifted to the second policy task, to lowering inflation. And now the growth of Russian economy is gradually slowing. So, in my mind, Russia, is still to find the new optimal balance, optimal combination of industrial policy and macroeconomic stability policy, with a bit greater focus on industrial development. And so, otherwise, if we don't find this balance, maybe increasing international debt would not be so useful for Russian economy. And as for India, I would like also to mention that this country is generally more closed to imports compared to many other BRICS countries. It is important for India to develop their own industrial base. And that's why, in my view, there are two main directions to cooperate with India for China and for Russia. Maybe the first and most obvious is to intensify trade in some specific areas, for example, to export machinery for railway transport, that is very widespread in India, or to import medicines. And the second direction is connected with increasing the outward foreign direct investment in India. As a possible solution, maybe some Russian companies may invest in India with the help of some Chinese technologies. This is maybe a bit of fantasy, and it is not ready to be implemented right now. Yeah, but if China chooses to increase its exports of licenses, one day exports of technologies, maybe this trilateral cooperation would be possible in future.
Thank you. And Gian, what are your thoughts on Andre's response here?
I think Andre mentioned two I think topics. One is Russia's internal decisions related to its economic situation. Secondly, is about Indian topics. So I may respond one by one. Firstly, as I should say, one of very few Chinese economists who has multiple experience in Russia. I have traveled a lot times in past 3 years in Russia. I met with your economists, different school, okay, and some level of officials as far as, for example, minister level. And I should say that I was taught that there's different very different schools in Russia. The mainstream school is similar to China. Is also deeply influenced by Western, mainstream, you know, new classical economics thoughts. Okay, like Nabiulina. Okay, like the Spurbank's Germans. Okay, Khalif and many others in the maybe Russian economic science. They are more, concerned about inflation issue, concerned of the national debt issue, and so from for the Chinese, I was very surprised to learn that the level of the Russian interest rate it once reached 21% in for quite, I think, more than half year in 2024, and then now roll down to, I remember, 15, 16 or 14%. I don't remember. I
Yeah,
actually I
about
have
that.
accounts. So I was, as a Chinese, will be surprised by this level of interest. Of course, I could see witness in 3 years the inflation situation in Russia. So I personally, so that is the mainstream economists in Russia concerned. The other school is represented by a person called Glaziev, and there is another, former minister on Far Eastern affairs. So they were boosting, come back to Stalin's periods ways of super high growth, and of course they are more nationalist and patriotic. But as far as I know, they used to be non-mainstream, but now getting more influential. So that's two ways of thinking in Russia. And as the mainstream economy still hold the Russian central bank, so actually, as described by Andrew, it now intentionally cool down the economy. And indeed, Russian economy is slowing down in 2020, 2025, as far as I know. It reached its peak on summer of 2024, and they're now cooling down. I think that to solve the Russian situation, that it concerns lots of things, inflation to COVID, but wants to still encourage economic growth. So it pushes lots of big agenda for the big projects. But as far as I know, I have to say they don't know how to implement it. And also at the same time, they face a challenge of population. I mean, workers' population shortage inside its country. And the Central Asian workers who used to play an important role in Russian economy now going back to their hometown because of the Chinese, involved project, like, for example, China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway is going up, and there Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan also experience super high economic prosperity in recent 2 years. So that is what it actually make challenges for Russia. So now, as far as I know, I don't comment on the inflation issue because I admit that is a problem, but I do talk with many Russian friends, even including your strategic thinkers, about how to solve the worker shortage. Particularly how to solve the worker shortage at the same time we could satisfy those projects, and at the same time avoid inflation. And that my suggestion is very clear and was welcomed by many of my Russian friends, is that bringing the elements of global south into Russia, of course, try to avoid the so-called immigration crisis in Europe. that is mainly focused on the construction side. And for those Russian companies, state-owned company now privileged, responsible for these national strategy tasks, but doesn't familiar with how to do that. They can be the general contractor and then outsource to Chinese one. The Chinese, for example, CCCC, okay, CREC, or this CREC means China Railway Engineering Corporation. So this is a very good experienced railway builder. And we have Ethiopian workers who build lots of African railways, and we bring them to Russia. And then you don't need worry that these Ethiopian workers come to Russian cities to do harassment, no problem. And then you pay, what ways you pay? You pay in rubles. You don't pay in dollars. And actually, the central bank created rubles to pay for this. And you can call it printing money, quote it, printing money. But actually, this was putting additional money into the circulation, just like what I described China and Global South. So Russia could be a part of it. As you know that why I say that when I say about this right Chinese yuan circulation, I didn't mention a lot with Russia. Although there's a natural trade, of, for example, the settlement of trade between China and Russia, all in Chinese yuan and rubles, and mainly in Chinese yuan. But for the side of creating money by loans, I don't mention Russia, because for the Chinese Policy Bank, which will be the major monetary creation vehicle for this circulation, they are very sensitive about Russia. For example, China Development Bank and Export Import Bank China, the two major ones, they will avoid to deal with Russia on this circumstance. In this way, Russian central bank should play an important role. Although I know that based on Nabiullina's doctrines, it's very hard for him to do that. But if Glaziev is your Russian central bank governor, he would definitely agree on that. So that will depending on the national leader, President Putin's decision. And I discussed with, for example, some of the strategic thinker who push that Russia should put more eastwards, to put more of its development focus eastwards to Siberia, to Far East, and so on. So he agreed very much on this. Today, Russia is now importing, Indian workers into some of its daily work, for example, cleaning and needs to replace Uzbekistan worker. So I should say that's way what will happen. I don't comment on that. I noticed that Indian workers, North Korean workers, and as far as I know, maybe Sri Lanka workers, Myanmar workers, they are all coming to Russia. That could be a phenomenon. And Ethiopian workers who come one day, but my suggestion is it should be under proper, management and efficient way to management of companies like Chinese companies, Chinese super big companies. I mean, construction companies. Firstly, construction. So that is for Russians. My thinking. Okay, and for Indian, I could put very direct. Firstly, China. I don't think China as a national policy, because we learned a lot. We learned a hard lesson 10 years ago. China will not involve in India's infrastructure building, including its internal railway construction building. No, zero possibility. And I personally agree with that, because based on geopolitical realism, that India is the only country has a potential, also very early stages, to become a super country like China. So comparatively, India is like China in the year of 1995. My personal suggestion, including its currency situation, rupee, Indian rupee, is just like Chinese yuan in 1995 or before 1998, and it's still in the early stage of development, but it has a super big potential. I admit that. So in this way, that considering India is always, I should say, speculating on the big, geopolitical camps. Today, China is one side, or the America is one side. It's always, snaking along here. Of, so I say that China would definitely not involve directly with Indians' internal construction. No, but as I understand that Russia has a very very good, from psychology to diplomatic, good relations with India. So my suggestion is very natural. We don't intentionally oppose India, but for these Indian affairs, my suggestion is that Russian play as a middleman, or is intermediary parties among that, because he keeps both good relationship with our countries and India. But I don't think Chinese companies will now recognize India as a potential big markets for its outputs or something. And by the way, I should mention a little bit about Andrew's suggestion about Chinese consumers should import more from other BRICS countries. So current situation is like that. Actually, notice not like those description in the Western economics media that okay, Chinese consumers' consumption is intentionally suppressed. No, actually, China's situation is that perhaps I should say on a consumption, for example, consumer price level, particular industry goods. Chinese consumer is the luckiest consumer in the world because we can buy those things very, very cheaply. So I think that on material level, on physics level, China's consumption is not low. We are normal or even high. The problem in Chinese society is that that means deflation. And deflation will generate pressure on corporate level to every employee. So every employee will feel pressure on that. So that is Chinese pressure. So that is why I say that this should expand it and includes other countries to build up and then artificially create markets. And for BRICS export to China, the problem is, for example, Russia, Brazil, and even India. What kinds of consumer level of product they can produce to Chinese product market? I see that Russian government is working very hard to push their product to China, and Chinese customer is very willing to buy Russian consumption goods. I can guarantee you, if there is any. So what they push to sell is many foods, Russian food. So you have to consider, of course, the taste, the national happy taste. So as far as I know, particularly in recent years, if there is Russian or especially authentic Russian goods, give to Russian Chinese. Many Chinese will buy it, no problem. The problem is that due to in Russia and Brazil, there are also deindustrialization in the past 20 years. So there is very little, on consumer level of the supply capacity for these countries, three major countries to China also, just like the Western countries. Okay, America doesn't have much to export to China on industry goods level. Some of the, for example, the U.S. brand Apple phones, they were actually manufactured in China actually, not in, I mean in China in USA. So that is situation. So that is my personal, comments on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andre, I want to get your opinion as sort of our last question. And everyone, please be sure to like and subscribe if you want to have Andre and Jean Lian back on for another episode, because we're just really getting to, we're just kind of going under the surface, so we can get into a lot more deeper a lot more deeper and richer discussion. So please be sure to come back for another discussion. But back to Andre. And this is going to be, and this will be our final question before we get back to another episode of this, Andre, because I wanted to go to you after Jan was explaining sort of the purchasing power of the Chinese consumer, because I think when we separate the investment flows with infrastructure, like you said, with these loans, we can separate it with a lot of these trade flows and these trade cycles that China is having, not just with not just with Russia, but like other BRICS countries in general. So Andre, let's assume that they actually the Chinese let's go off Jian's point that they have a really good purchasing power, and even as even like even like undervalued renminbi in this case. How do you think they are balancing the value of their currency with also how much they want to boost trade and demand into these countries? Because we know that it's going to have an effect on their currency the deeper and the more integrated they are in these markets, and it will come back and it will affect the Chinese consumer as well.
Oh, yeah, I think the Chinese renminbi is devalued at the moment. Yes, but I would like to make some additional comments on this issue. Um, if to, we know that there are several exchange rate measures, such as nominal effective exchange rate or real effective exchange rate. And the difference between them is the inflation differential. This is the difference between inflation in China and other countries. And according to this indicator, China's yuan has depreciated significantly in past 2 or 3 years, but the main factor that accounted for this depreciation was this inflation differential. And without the correction for inflation, Chinese yuan has depreciated only slightly. And in my opinion, this means that low inflation in China is the main source of the current phase of yuan depreciation. This makes domestic products more and more affordable to Chinese consumers, as Lian said. In the Western narrative, it's quite common to accuse China in some unfair practices with its national currency, but I do not see some evidence for this sort of discussion. In my mind, maybe one of the reasons of low inflation in China is maybe the policy that stimulates some over competition between Chinese producers. So we may have some overproduction in some segments that results in low prices, high exports, and rising purchasing power of Chinese consumers. But this also helps to implement large-scale projects, infrastructure projects, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, and some projects in the highway, in the high-speed railways. But in the future, maybe this may have a risk of eroding profits of companies that engage in this tough competition.
Because there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of. There's definitely going to be a lot of events that may challenge what the uh, what the CCP or also just within respective countries do in sort of the how they trade or how they change their trade and how they're going to adjust themselves structurally to anything like commodity related inflation shocks or anything like that. But I do want to conclude our discussion here. This was a great clash of not just the trade data and the finance fixes, but also just understanding sort of as BRICS as a resource base that's evolving into a more balanced block. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining us. Audience, I want you all to please put your own questions in the comments section. Anything between renminbi and BRICS, tariffs, or what may happen in the next 10 years, and let us know if you want to have them back, because I certainly do. But until next time, guys, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll talk to again each other very soon.